Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Recreational Sniper. My camera's probably about to die, so I'm going to try to get through this pretty quick. So, let's talk about some concepts of like a battle rifle. There's been a whole tons of debates on what kind of cartridge and setup you should choose. I don't have an AR-15, but I do have this Ruger American with a 16-inch barrel chambered in 5.56, and I also have my AR-10 chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. So we're gonna kind of look at the pros and cons of those. Alright, so we're gonna kind of nerd out on some ballistics here. If you're shooting a 5.56 with the typical 55 grain FMJ like I have here, you're going to be running out of a 16-inch barrel, at least in my experience with this rifle, getting about 3,000, maybe a little more, about 3,000 feet per second of muzzle velocity. So the energy at the muzzle is about 1,100 foot-pounds of energy, okay? Now these bullets have, these 55 grain FMJs have a G1 ballistic coefficient of 0.269, so it's not really great for long-range use. So with that 3,000 foot per second muzzle velocity, we're looking at a supersonic range of about 800 yards. That's where it passes through the transonic zone and goes through the transonic barrier and goes below Mach 1. And at that distance, that the remaining energy of that bullet that it's carrying is about 135 foot-pounds, so not much energy when it gets out there. Now at the range that it is still carrying about 500 foot-pounds of energy, which y'all have heard me talk about in the past, is 500 foot-pounds is usually my threshold for game up to 200 pounds. So 500 foot-pounds of energy, it will carry 500 foot-pounds of energy to about 300 yards. Past 300 yards, it drops below 500 foot-pounds of energy. So as far as effective lethal range for 5.56 with a 55 grain projectile, then, you know, of course this is my experience with a 16-inch barrel, 3,000 feet per second muzzle velocity and that sort of thing. Like, this is all very specific stuff. The effective really lethal range is about 300 yards. Now obviously people are going to jump on board and say, no, you can kill things way further out than that with a 5.56, and I totally agree. You know, shot placement is key, but for effective energy transfer, like enough energy transfer that you know, it's not just going to be a slow kill, you know, where you want 500 foot-pounds of energy is going to be about 300 yards with a 5.56. Okay, now we can kind of talk about the 6.5 Creedmoor, and this is a 140 grain FMJ. Now, shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor from a 16-inch barrel like I have here on my 6.5 Creedmoor AR-10, we are losing quite a bit of muzzle velocity, but not as much as you might think, because I shoot the same bullet through my 26-inch bolt action upper, which we will get to here in a little bit. But this is a 26-inch Uintah Precision UPR-10 upper, and we can compare the velocities on those. With the 16-inch, we're getting a muzzle velocity average of 2,593 feet per second, so it's about 2,600 feet per second. And then with the 26-inch, with the same cartridge, or same cartridge, we are getting 2,781 feet per second, so about 2,780. And the difference in muzzle velocity of that 10-inch difference in barrel length is 188 feet per second, okay? So let's kind of look at this a little bit. The G1 ballistic coefficient on this particular projectile is a 0.548, so we're into the 500s of the G1, which means that this is actually a really good design. That is an actual legit long-range bullet there. So in the 16-inch barrel, our supersonic range of this projectile is 1,300 yards, and at 1,300 yards it is still carrying 378 foot-pounds of energy. Now our 500 foot-pound threshold that, again, I like to maintain for you know, animals up to 200 pounds, is our 500 foot-pound threshold is at 1,000 yards. So this cartridge will carry 500 foot-pounds of energy more than 3 times the distance of this cartridge. Okay, and then if we were to load the same cartridge into that 26-inch bolt action upper, then our supersonic range extends to 1,400 yards, so we get an extra 100 yards of range out of it. And at 1,400 yards, it's carrying 384 foot-pounds of energy, so even a little more energy than it would out of the 16-inch barrel at 1,300 yards. And then its 500 foot-pound threshold range is extended out to 1,100 yards in that 26-inch upper. Alright, now I do have another 6.5 Creedmoor FMJ here, but these are hand loads and they're kind of hot, but I only loaded them for that bolt action upper. I did not load them to run in the AR-10. I have attempted to shoot them in the AR-10, but they result in some malfunctions due to they are a little bit high on the pressure side, and the primers start getting ejected out of the brass in that reciprocating action, causing jamming and that sort of thing. So with this bullet, it is a 144 grain Lapua FMJ, and you may or may not can see, but it is a little bit longer projectile. The nose is a little sharper, and with it, out of the 26-inch upper, I'm getting about 2,914 feet per second average for a 144 grain FMJ. Don't know why it's that fast. Honestly, the primers are not flat on these when I shoot them, but I've got a really tight extreme spread and velocity. It's like under 20 feet per second. But anyways, at the muzzle, we're producing 2,720 foot-pounds of energy with this. So about 3.8 times as much as you would get with that 2.8 times as much as you would get with the 5.56 with the 55 grain. And going that fast with this particular projectile, because it's got a higher ballistic coefficient, we're looking at 0.636, so it's significantly better than the 144 grain. We have a supersonic range of 1,700 yards with this 144 grain projectile, and at 1,700 yards it is still carrying over 400 foot-pounds of energy. So it greatly outdoes the 140 grain, but that also has to do with the starting muzzle speed, muzzle velocity as well. It carries at least 500 foot-pounds of energy out to 1,400 yards, so it'll be very, very effective for a very long range. You know, we're talking 3/4 of a mile. You know, okay. So while we're nerding out on these cartridges, let's kind of talk about the differences here, though, because we also got to think that, you know, if you're carrying ammunition, 100 rounds of this little guy is going to be a lot less weight than 100 rounds of one of these. So I've already done the math on that. 100 rounds of your little 5.56 55 grain bullet, they are weighing about 173 grains per cartridge, the whole cartridge. And so basically that's about 2.5 pounds for 100 rounds of these. Not very much weight at all. It'd be easy to carry 100 rounds of 5.56. Now if we jump into the 6.5 Creedmoor with these 140 and 144 grain projectiles, 100 rounds now is about 5 pounds, about twice as much weight, because the cartridges weigh about twice as much. They're about 348.5 grains for the 140 grain one and 357 grains for the 144, and that has to do with the difference in powder weight and bullet weight added together. So 100 rounds with the 144 grain is going to be 5.1 pounds, and 100 rounds with the 140 grain is going to be 4.98 pounds. So if you were to carry 100 rounds of this, it would be equal to carrying about 200 rounds of this. So it's up to you. You could carry more ammunition and less space, or vice versa. If your limit was that 2.5 pounds, you would only be able to carry about 50 rounds of that 6.5 Creedmoor for the same amount of weight. And then there are also other dynamics when it comes to shooting these cartridges, like muzzle, recoil and muzzle movement and jump and that sort of thing. And obviously, your little 5.56 is going to be a lot more tame to shoot. But on this particular rifle here, this 6.5 Creedmoor, I've got a really nice muzzle brake on it, decently aggressive. It's an Area 419 Hellfire, and it actually makes this gun quite pleasurable to shoot, at least for the shooter. I will say, for the bystanders around you, this thing has quite the concussion coming off of it, quite the muzzle blast. It is, it's really impressive. I actually let a buddy of mine shoot it last weekend while I stood by and watched, and that first round that he cracked off, it was actually really surprising. It made me take a step back because of the amount of muzzle blast that comes off of this rifle. It is absolutely insane. So that is one thing to think about. If you were like in a house clearing scenario, this probably might not be the most ideal weapon, because even with like double hearing protection and stuff, it displaces the atmosphere in the immediate area. I'm not even joking. It's the most weird experience to be near this thing shooting. But if you're actually the shooter, the one behind the gun, you don't get to experience that. The muzzle brake does a really good job of directing all those expanding gases out away from you, and being behind the rifle, you really don't experience how terrible the muzzle blast is. It's everybody else around you that gets to experience that, and I'm telling you, it like displaces the atmosphere in a way that I have not seen before, except for when I had shot my 50 cal for the first time. That was an experience. But I want to say that this is like, I don't want to say that this is comparable to that, but it kind of gives the same effect. So even like versus my 338 Lapua, this has a worse muzzle blast on it, and I think that's because it's got a short barrel and there's a whole lot of unburnt powder just expanding out from the muzzle, continuing its burn outside the muzzle and that sort of thing when it goes off. But I digress. I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of what's going on, and kind of the differences in like 5.56 versus like an AR-10 setup, whether it's a 308 or a 6.5 Creedmoor. I will say with that 6.5 Creedmoor, you obviously get way more effective range out of it and way more muzzle energy and that sort of thing. But the cons of that is it's got way more muzzle blast and it's heavier. The ammunition is physically heavier. The rifle, this one here, is actually not a very heavy setup. It's actually really comfortable to shoot. Plus the muzzle brake that's on there is aggressive enough that it takes almost all the recoil out. It's actually really easy to get follow-up shots with. The optic on it is a Burris RT5 prism. This is a fixed 5-power prism, and I really like it. I've kind of looked into going the LPVO route and stuff, but every time I shoot this gun, I realize that I just like that optic. It just works great for this setup for me. It's not too much power on the zoom that I can't make follow-up shots or can't make quick shots on short targets, but and it's got enough zoom on it that I can easily make shots, past 300 yards if I want to, as long as I'm trying to hit, like a regular sized target or whatever. Now, you're not going to get super pinpoint accuracy out of it because, well, you only got 5 power to look through, and the dot is kind of big. I think it's about a 3 MOA dot in the center of this reticle, so at 100 yards, it's covering up about 3 inches of target. So, yeah. But it's a great setup. I do know one thing. I have with this rifle, it's not the most reliable as far as function goes. I can get about 100 rounds through it before it starts jamming. At about my 100 round mark, I know I really need to tear this thing apart and clean it, because the chamber starts getting really tight and sticky. The rounds start sticking in the chamber and they don't want to come out, you know, the spent casings. And part of the reason why is because the barrel in this is a Wilson Combat match grade barrel, so it's got a really tight match chamber in it. And I've considered actually polishing the chamber and kind of maybe open it up about 1 or 2 10,000ths of an inch, just a hair, you know, polish it out a little bit and maybe see how that goes. Maybe get a little more reliability out of it. Maybe I can get it to run at least a couple 100 rounds before I need to clean it. But at the end of the day, if you got to shoot a couple 100 rounds out of a gun, if you're in that kind of a situation, especially a couple 100 rounds of 6.5 Creedmoor, then well, you're in a bad situation. Let's just put it that way. Me personally, my setup for this, and that is my battle rifle, I've decided not to go the 5.56 route. I would rather spend the money that it would cost me to get a 5.56 AR and, you know, get it all set up with light and optic and everything that I wanted on it and that sort of thing. With the amount of money that it would cost me to do that, if I've decided to take, you know, just focus like, hey, you know, that'd be an extra $1,500 probably for a decent setup, and I can take that $1,500 and I can spend that on ammunition and other stuff for this rifle and get better at shooting this rifle. And I think that for me personally, I would rather do that, you know. But for my setup, that's my battle setup of choice is my 6.5 Creedmoor AR-10. And for the reasons of, you know, long range is kind of my deal. And I wanted a short AR setup, semi-auto setup, that also had the potential to go to 1,000 yards. And basically that's what I've come up with. It makes the most sense to me to do multiple purpose things. It's not too heavy to carry around. And, you know, 100 rounds of ammo is going to be 5 pounds of ammo for this thing. That's not too bad, versus I could carry 200 rounds for the same amount of weight in a 5.56. And honestly, your 5.56 AR is probably only going to weigh maybe 1 pound less than what this rifle does. This rifle, I believe, just by feeling it, I'm going to say it weighs about 7 pounds. So it's really not that bad with bipod and flashlight and optic and that sort of thing on there. About 7 pounds. With a full mag, probably 8.5 pounds, something like that. So not that heavy, not too heavy that it's unwieldy. But also, while we're talking about that, part of the reason why I really like this setup is for this purpose here, that I can swap the upper on it just by popping the 2 pins. So I can pop the 2 takedown pins. I said that. Alright, you separate your upper, your AR-10 upper here, and then I can take this guy, whoop, she's a long boy now, then I can take this guy here, and now I have a very serious long range setup, right? So now I can really stretch out there in what, you know, like under 30 seconds. I can swap that out and stick the same mag with the same ammunition in it, gain another 200 feet per second, and gain potentially, you know, another 100 to 200 yards of range, plus a more precise shot setup. You got an actual proper scope on it, and you know, that's just to me, it's a really cool setup. And with this thing, I know it shoots good, even with the same ammunition, and it shoots really good with those hand loads, those 144 grains that I've got loaded up. And of course, what I would do is probably have a setup where I've got in my kit is where I've got one mag that stays loaded and marked with the 144 grains, because those are going to get me out like right at a mile with this gun if I want it to. And that would just stay that for that purpose. And then the other 4 mags would be loaded with the 140 grain, and I still will be able to get out to you know, at least 1,400 yards with that 140 grain. So there you go. That's kind of the reason why I got this set up. It's like if I end up in a scenario where I really need to get out to a mile, I can do that with these hand loads. But 140 grain that also will run in the AR-10 upper will get me out to 1,400 yards with this UPR-10 bolt action upper. And in the AR, even in the AR, it's going to get me out to 1,300 yards if I really want it. But I don't have a, you know, not a super powerful scope on that, which brings me to another thing. Is me and my dad were talking about it, and we've actually, you know, he was like, well, why don't you try shooting that AR-10 with a, you know, stick a real scope on it and see how far that thing really will go. And I thought, you know, that's a good idea. Let's try that. So I am going to take probably the scope off of this upper, and I'm going to mount it on the AR-10 upper, and then actually zero it and take it out and see how it does at long range. You know, see if all of this math and nerdy ballistic stuff actually holds water or not. Because, you know, I can talk about all this stuff, we can run the ballistic data and all that crap all day long, but unless we actually test it, we don't know how it's going to function. But anyways, that's what I got for you guys today. We're not going to the range. I'm actually about to clean a whole bunch of guns. Like, all these rifles need to be cleaned desperately. So that's what I'm doing today. I just want to take the time to go over cool battle rifle setups and that sort of thing, and dual purpose rifle setups, and show you guys my choice and my pick of the way I'm doing things. Now, the way you do it's probably going to be totally different. The way the cartridges and rounds you want to choose, those may be totally different. But for me, this is what I like, this is what I know, and this is what I'm going with. You know, it works for me. So whatever works for me may not work for you, and whatever works for you may not work for me. But it's an ever-evolving deal. It's like, you know, if I find something that works better, obviously I'm going to change and start doing that thing. Whatever works the best is what I'm going to go for. So for me, so far, what I have works out the best, and it makes the most sense to me in my mind. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time in the next video. I'm going to get to cleaning these guns.